Hey folks, Joe DeSanto here. In this video, I'm going to talk a little bit about the difference between a person that works for you, an employee that's either classified as an employee, quote unquote, or an independent contractor. Sometimes that distinction can be very easy to make. Sometimes it's a little trickier. So I want to talk about a little bit of the details of that. Hope you enjoyed the video. I'm Joe DeSanto, by the way. I'm an independent CFO and business consultant. I actually spent most of my career in Los Angeles building a few multi-million-dollar businesses, and I've since semi-retired, and now I help other businesses and individuals manage their money and plan better for their future. So if you're interested in small business, personal finance, and real estate advice, please subscribe to the channel. Thanks. In this video, it's kind of a follow-up to the one about the W-2, W-4, 1099, and W-9 forms. Those tax forms essentially relate to reporting tax information or income information for either employees or independent contractors. So those are the two kinds of people, if you're a business owner, that are going to work for you, or if you're, the employee or worker, you might work in either of those capacities depending on the situation. Now, actually, I guess I should give the disclaimer, I'm not an attorney or a CPA, so this information you could take as beginner information to eventually your lawyer or CPA to get the best final determination for your situation, but it'll give you good information to bring up and to talk about. Oftentimes there's a clear distinction of a quote-unquote employee. It's someone that works for your company full-time. They come in 5 days a week, 40 hours a week. They have to come in on set hours and so on. And it's just very clear that, they work for you as a full-time employee, and they're going to be in the quote-unquote W-2 employee category. Now, another clear distinction is probably a part-time employee, someone maybe they don't work full-time, but they come in on a weekly basis, usually at the same kind of times and so on, and they're working for you in a regular capacity, and that's going to be ongoing and so on. Where it does get a little confusing is if you hire what is commonly referred to as a freelancer, but this term freelancer, independent contractor, 1099er kind of all fall in this sort of other bucket. And it's basically like you hire someone to do a job, but and they know that it's only going to be a couple weeks, for example. You essentially have to determine, how do I classify this person? Do I pay them with the W-2 kind of payroll system, even though I know that this is just a short-term gig? Or can I pay them as a 1099er where, I don't have to, as the employer, deal with taking out any taxes and sending that into the IRS. They kind of have to deal with that all themselves. Now, sometimes this is very clear, and it depends. Let's say, for instance, you're a graphic design firm and you hire a plumber. Well, clearly a plumbing job is not going to be a permanent full-time or part-time position at a graphic design firm, I guess, unless you're a really huge one and you have a giant, facility. In addition to it clearly being a short-term position, plumbing is not the line of business of graphic design, right? So what I mean by that is if you were to now hire a graphic designer for a 2-week period, and graphic design is what your company does, well, that fact could play a part in whether or not you classify them as a 1099er and W-2. Now, what I tend to call people that are freelance, working in the line of work of the company, you can also probably call them a temp employee. So there are other ways to kind of make this distinction, but it's getting a little harder since COVID and people working at home. But previously, if the person came in and worked on your equipment, if even though they were working only for like a week or two or however long the job went, if they worked on predefined hours, as in they had to come into your office from 9 to 5, for this 2-week period, they worked on your equipment, they did the work that your company does, i.e. your company provides graphic design services and this person is a graphic designer. If that were the case, they most clearly in the eyes of the Fed and state would be what I would call a temporary employee. So you would treat them as a W-2 person. You would take out taxes of their pay. You would send it on to the state and IRS and so on. Nowadays, people work at home, right? So in the case of a graphic designer, they might be working for you for 2 weeks. They might roughly be working on an expected schedule, but they're working at home. They're not coming to the office. They're working on their own equipment often. It's a short-term predefined job. And, they might not be working exact hours, right? They might not be working 9 to 5. They just need to know they need to be available in that window for like a phone call or something, but they have a certain amount of work they need to get done, and they deliver that in a rough time period. And it becomes a little bit more unclear, can I pay them as a 1099 or do I have to pay them as a temp W-2? Now, to further confuse this, some professions, and specifically graphic design, have basically an exemption for this specific setup, because a lot of times graphic designers often work as freelancers. So some states and the Fed do offer some exemptions for some professions. And that's why I say at the end of the day, you want to work with an employment attorney in your state and come up with sort of a criteria by which you can classify people. It could be tempting to just make every part-time person a 1099er because it's easier and less expensive, but that could end up coming back and biting you in terms of having to pay back taxes and fees and so on. So you want to make sure you get the right advice for your state. And a lot of this is driven by state-specific rules. The Fed, of course, has some basic rules as well, but the states do tweak things a little bit and maybe make the criteria even more stringent than the Fed might. Particularly California is a state that has worked hard to try to get more and more people classified as W-2 employees as opposed to 1099ers. So in the case of something like a plumber, it's very clear. They don't do what you do. They're going to, God knows with a plumber, let's hope they even show up on time, never mind, or within the week they said they'd be there. So they're not working on your schedule. They're not working on your equipment. Very clear. And honestly, if they're a plumber that's incorporated as like a corporation, an INC, you don't even need to send them a 1099, which is kind of weird. If they're a plumber that is not incorporated and only you pay them to their name, John Smith Plumber, you would have to send them a 1099. So it's that's another layer of confusion for the employer. When do I have to send 1099s to independent contractors? When do I don't? Well, maybe I'll do another video on that. But once you get your criteria set up, it gets a little easier to make the decision on whether or not you are paying someone as a temp freelancer or freelancer sort of independent contractor. What makes it even a little further challenging is now that people work in different states, that's a factor, because if you do have to pay essentially temp workers that work in different states, you might have to set up state unemployment insurance accounts in various states. So it can snowball, I guess, a little bit, if you will. Also, I brought up, just for a quick look, the forms related to whether someone is a employee or independent contractor. Now, I go into a little more detail with these in the other video, but if you determine someone is a temporary employee or a.k.a. W-2er, they're going to fill out your W-4 when they start working, so they give you their tax-related information, and at the end of the year, you're going to send them a W-2. If they are a independent contractor or freelancer, prior to paying them, I always try to get the W-9 prior to paying anyone because it's always hard to get it later. The contractor is going to fill out a W-9, which is basically going to give you their name, social, or their business name and tax ID, address, and so on, but no tax info because you're not going to be holding back any taxes. At the end of the year, you will send your contractors a 1099 so that you can report to the IRS and to them, how much you paid them and so on. More detail on these in that other video. Maybe we'll put a link to that. Anyway, that's the basic gist of making a distinction between a W-2er, as I call them, or temp employee, W-2 employee, staff employee, and a freelancer slash independent contractor slash 1099er, as they're often referred to. Hope that was helpful. I will see you in another video. Thanks.